Ready for that?
That one I can answer right off, yeah.
All right, we're rolling. And I'll ask the question again and count to 3. What is your name? What do you do? And at what reserve?
I'm Tom Gaskill. I'm the Education Coordinator at the South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve in Charleston, Oregon.
Rolling. I'll ask the question again and count to 3. Why do you think collaboration is a good approach for coastal resource management?
I think that mutual respect in collaboration is one of the foundations of trying to get your audience to accept that what you have to offer will be worthwhile for them. And so in the case of teachers, that respect means that you have educational methods and experience that they have used or seen in action. In the case of science, often they are not the specialists that you are, and when you can offer an interpretation of the science that they might teach more in a theoretical sense, but you're starting to look at the applied science that is generated by the reserves, I think they recognize that as of value to their endeavor.
Okay, so I'll ask that again if I can remember it. How does the education work that you do link to the issue priorities at the reserve, and what is the role of your target audience in those priorities?
So habitat restoration and the protection of habitat are certainly priorities for us within the reserve, and also the idea of bringing that out into the community, recognizing that the many areas in our estuary are highly impacted. And oftentimes the way that we'll get to that with the education community of teachers is to think about something like salmon, which end up being a very important issue for people in terms of both the fishery and also the efforts that have been undertaken to restore salmon habitat, and how that's impacted people's ability or not to do certain things in the community. And these teachers are these are small coastal towns, and so the teachers often play, they wear several hats, and when we provide them with a pathway to the science that we're using in order to conduct habitat restoration or to understand how to make our habitat restoration effective, those teachers then start to be able to employ that with their students in the classroom, and understanding that something like restoration of salmon runs goes well beyond simply hatcheries and putting more fish into the system, but it also involves complex habitat restoration and monitoring to try and understand how effective that habitat restoration is. Coastal management and how education fits into coastal management, the one that I think is hardest for us sometimes is that we have to remember today's coastal managers went through an educational system 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. So we need to be thinking down the road 10, 15, 30 years, because our next coastal management audience will come from that educational system. And so if we aren't providing them with a really grounded understanding in how science is used to inform decision making, they won't be prepared. They will have to specialize in many avenues that they won't really have an understanding of how coastal ecosystems work. Why would they? Why would city planners think about something like that? But that's really challenging, because it's difficult to track that. You know, how do you take a 5th grade audience and figure out who the potential planners will be out of that 5th grade audience, and what will they remember from 5th grade? But there is a lot of evidence to show that these field-based educational experiences using best practices do make that kind of impact. And we have programs where we work with high school students that often, depending on the depth of the program, they end up going into fields of science, following up in careers in science. And we know that the activities that we do are formative to them following that pathway in that career. They see science in a whole different way. A cool breeze would be lovely.
I'll summon one.
Yes, please.
I'm rolling. Audio's good.
So one of the values I think that education plays in terms of coastal management is harder to track. It's a long-term value, and that is that the children that we educate today, that we ground in understanding coastal management issues and priority issues, those are the future decision makers. Those are the people who will eventually become planners and participate in councils and government and in private industry that will have to have a better understanding of what is at stake on our coasts and how science can help to inform the decision making. And we know from the research that when meaningful experiences in the field occur that are tied to their classrooms and in a way that provides for preparation and action and then reflection, that these kinds of experiences turn into career choices and long-term decisions that have great impact on these students. So some of these students, particularly at the high school level, once they've participated in real science, field-based science and laboratory science through apprenticeships and this kind of thing, they make choices in their educational career that ultimately lead to a better informed citizenry. And I firmly believe that that is a part of changing the dynamic of how we manage our coasts.
And I'll ask the question again. What has been your experience using collaborative processes?
One of the most, I think, effective uses of collaboration that we have engaged in recently has a name, the Oregon Coast Education Program. And several years ago, we were looking to develop a teacher education program that would leverage some of the marine education institutions on the Oregon coast. We knew there were a few, and we had a common interest in moving our program forward, but in order to do that, we recognized that we needed one, to collaborate as institutions, and two, that we needed the input of educators, professional educators, and highly skilled classroom educators to really make our impact more meaningful. And so we started with what we call our core team, and these are the representatives from the institutions, informal science education institutions on the coast, and we developed a program design that involved or identified a leadership team. This leadership team was comprised of administrators and resource specialists and teachers, but seasoned teachers that had been working in the field 20, 30 years and had demonstrated good practices with their students. We brought that group together to both learn from one another about the different perspectives that they might have on how to develop a teacher education program, but also how to select materials and curriculum and design field experiences that would really be effective and might be adopted by both new educators and also educators that have been in the field for a while but maybe weren't using the best practices. So that program now has really grown to include partners that are non-coastal entities. So we have partners at the High Desert Museum in Bend, Oregon, and Tryon Creek State Park in Portland, and also at Portland State University. And so now we're starting to see kind of a new dimension to the program where the trainings that we offer not only leverage our resources, but they leverage everybody's resources. So that's been a very exciting and continues to be, lots of new opportunities popping up through that.
Rolling.
I'll ask that question and then count to three. What have you found challenging about the use of a collaborative approach, and how have you handled
think that one of the biggest challenges of collaboration is making sure that you get that solid look in the eye from your partners. We're at the table, right? And we have a common interest here, staying to what that common interest is, and recognizing that institutions might not necessarily have that common interest. People have that common interest, and they have to tease that out of what their institution's mission is. That's very important. Collaboration and competitiveness can be problematic sometimes. So if you get too competitive between partnerships, the collaboration breaks down, and you have to put some effort in to get it back on track, to make sure that you're sharing, finding the common parts of your missions and focusing that on the project at hand.